مرحبا وأهلا بكم في برنامج داخل واشنطن. معكم مضيفكم روبرت ساتلوف. بالنسبة إلى بعض الناس هي تعتبر أداة أساسية للعمل واللعب. بالنسبة للآخرين هي مصدر رئيسي للمعلومات والترفيه والتعلم. بالنسبة إلى آخرين هي سلاح يستخدم لارتكاب جرائم مروعة. وبالنسبة إلى آخرين هي إدمان، إنها شيء لا يمكنهم العيش بدونه. ما التي نتكلم عنها؟ إنها الإنترنت بالطبع. هذه هي التكنولوجيا التي لم تكن موجودة عندما التحقت بالجامعة. أصبحت الآن لا غنى عنها. الحياة كما نعلم لم تكن لتوجد بدون الإنترنت. ترتبط جميع جوانب حياتنا بالإنترنت، سواء في حياتنا المهنية أو حياتنا الشخصية. السؤال الذي يطرحه الكثيرون في الكونغرس هو: هل خرجت الإنترنت عن السيطرة؟ هل شركات الإنترنت مثل غوغل وفيسبوك قوية للغاية؟ هل يجب أن تسيطر الحكومة على الإنترنت بإحكام أكثر؟ في نظامنا الرأسمالي ما هي أفضل طريقة لتنظيم هذا الجزء الحيوي من حياة؟ لمناقشة الجدل السياسي المحيط بالسيطرة على الإنترنت والسيطرة على شركات الإنترنت الأكثر نفوذاً، يسعدني أن أرحب بخبيري سياسة التكنولوجيا مات بندر وجيف ديرومو. Welcome back to Dakhel, Washington. When I was growing up, it didn't exist. Today, it virtually controls everything we do. I'm talking, of course, about the internet. It helps us wake up in the morning, it guides us through our day, and sometimes puts us to sleep. Who controls the internet? Does it control us too much? Are the regulations right? Do we need more? And who should make the regulations? To discuss all the issues about internet policy and the politics of the internet today, I'm delighted to welcome Jeff Derumeau and Matt Binder. Thank you very much for joining us today, gentlemen. So,
Thanks for
Matt,
having me.
let's just ask the very basic question. Who owns the internet? Who controls the internet?
Right. Well, it's a multifaceted question, but the short answer is the people who run the most popular platforms and obviously your internet service provider. Without both of those aspects, the internet really doesn't function in the way that we know the internet to function. I mean, obviously you need your ISP company to connect you to the internet, and then also you need the major platforms that you're on to be able to communicate and consume whatever content you're into, and contact your friends and family. So when it comes down to it, it is the rich and powerful who run these big tech companies.
So you say the big companies and the internet service providers. Jeff, if I were to ask you who owns and who controls the internet, what's your answer?
I mean, I would agree with Matt. The service providers are the on and off switch, right? So without them, we don't have access to anything. But I think when we talk about the internet, we talk about information. And my concern is more who owns the information, who distributes the information, and that would be the big tech platforms.
So you're focused on content as well as turning on and off the switch. If the companies are responsible and control, who sets the rules? Is there a role for government in any of this, Jeff?
I believe there is. Someone has to. I believe in the freedom of speech and the freedom of information, but someone has to be able to control what's given to us, and especially control what we're able to share. I think it's, I'm French, and I really believe that, we say that my freedom stops where your freedom begins. And right now it's kind of like the wild, wild west on the internet. There's no one really telling me where to stop and where to start. And I think someone has to step in.
So that raises a number of questions, Matt. One, whose job is it and what role does government play? And then Jeff is French. Should French rules affect Americans? Should American rules affect Germans? How do we create a global set of understandings, if not actual rules?
It is a difficult thing, the internet, due to that reason. But whether it's, I guess, fortunately, if you are of the belief that the U.S., the United States of America, should be running the online sphere, or whether this is a negative aspect, if you are in the rest of the world, the U.S. really does set the standards. And you just look at how the domain name system works, where basically U.S. corporations that basically have contracts with the U.S. government run the most basic asset of the internet, which is the domain names. .com, .net. These are all domains that are run by the registry is run by a U.S. corporation. On top of that, when you go to .gov, out of all the governments in the world, who runs .gov? It's the United States of America. So we can set these rules to have, and we should, to have the entire globe have a say. But right now, as it is, the United States of America pretty much sets the standards.
And how do French people or people outside the United States think about the dominant role of the United States in setting standards? Jeff.
I mean, I'm not sure I'm the best person to answer that, because I live in the US, so I follow. But I think there's also a cultural element to it. When you buy using Google or Facebook or Instagram, you buy in American companies that were created and run by American citizens. So I think there's definitely a cultural bias to it. And I mean, I would love to see a global initiative to regulate the internet and content, but let's face it, it's not every day that countries are able to get together and agree on things.
So neither of you have yet, I think, unless I'm wrong, mentioned the word consumers in any of this discussion. Do consumers play a role at all in determining the rules and regulations that govern how the internet operates?
I mean, consumers play a huge role in the content on the internet. I mean, without the consumers, because they're not only the consumers, not only consuming the content, a lot of consumers are also the creators of this content in the terms of this new creator economy, where, ordinary people are the ones who are producing the videos and the audios and the podcasts and the images that people and the articles that people are reading and watching and listening to every day. But when it comes down to it, there are times where people pressure has worked in terms of, certain government regulations that have gone too far. People have fought in recent years online to basically make sure that, for example, with net neutrality, consumers, I feel like, have played a major role in making sure that the internet is seen as equal in terms of the content online. For example, your internet service provider, at least the United States of America right now, they cannot.
Just take a moment and explain to our viewers what net neutrality is.
Right. So net neutrality is basically the belief that your internet service provider should not be able to charge you extra to access certain content that they would consider premium. So, for example, imagine you wanted to watch a specific streaming service like Netflix, and your internet service provider decided that, we have a good deal with Netflix. They're a big company. They pay us to basically make sure everyone who has the basic internet package can access Netflix. However, maybe a smaller upcoming streaming startup can't compete with that, does not have, that kickback that they give the internet service provider. So that internet service provider says, and if our consumers want to access that new streaming service, they have to be a part of our Internet Unlimited plan, which costs an extra $20 a month or something like that. That's just an example. That's net neutrality, the belief that, you can't do that. People should be able to access all these platforms via their internet package, their internet service provider, and it should all be seen as equal, no matter how big or small that website or service or platform is.
So this is an example of consumers coming together and urging the government to set a rule that benefits them. But do we see consumers doing this on other aspects of issues that are of great great relevance to them, Jeff?
I don't actually, and I think consumers assume they have a passive role outside of creating content, but they have a passive role in terms of regulations. Or the internet is big nebulous, and they don't really know where to or who to go and speak to about changing things. So to my example, sometimes they get together and they put pressure on governments, but that brings back the question: are governments the right body to regulate the internet?
And your basic answer to that question is
no.
No.
No, because of the cultural differences and what matters to people in different parts of the globe. I feel like governments can't handle the task.
Government, it's not the right role for government. And Matt, your basic answer to that question is?
I would say it depends. For example, with Facebook, globally, Facebook actually has very positive outlook. People generally globally have a very positive feeling about Facebook. You could just look at Mark Zuckerberg's Facebook posts when he put something on his profile and see all the comments, celebrating him from across the world. Usually these users are in, countries like, maybe South America or in Asia. But if you look at the users who are feeling negatively about it and are criticizing him, those tend to more be, people in the United States. And that is due to, I think, how people in these countries use these platforms and how they view them as a net positive or a net negative to their society as a whole.
All right. So when we come back after the break, I want to pick up on this and ask both of you why companies like Facebook and Google have become such villains in the American popular culture, including the leadership of these companies, and what sort of remedies are out there. I know that there was a major testimony recently given, which got enormous press and attention here in the United States. And what sort of realistic remedies out there to address the criticisms that so many people have for these big companies that we all seem to be hooked onto anyway? And we'll be back to discuss this in just a moment. Again, my guests today include Matt Bender. Matt is a reporter at Mashable, where he covers the intersection of social media and politics, and he is the host of the Doomed podcast. Not that the podcast is doomed, it is called Doomed. Previously, he reported for Cafe and The Majority Report. Also joining us today is Jeff Demerumeau. Jeff is the founder, CEO, and editor-in-chief of We Are Social Media, an online news platform for engaging all aspects of the internet as a social business interface, from analytics to advertising to brand building. All right. So Matt, earlier you mentioned Mark Zuckerberg, the face obviously of Facebook. There's Google. There's all these big companies that have emerged in American popular culture, at least in many corners of American popular culture, as villains. Now, for many different reasons, depending if you're on the right or the left. Some consider them, antithetical to conservatives. Some think that they are too controlling. All sorts of criticisms. How did it emerge that these companies, which provided such an amazing service for people for so long, how did they evolve into villains? Jeff?
I mean, like you just said, it really depends who is talking about them, right? And I'm sure even in America, some people would be pro-Twitter for things that they've done in the past administration, and some people are against them for the exact same thing they did. I think it's just a matter of, I think it comes down to who is behind them. And Matt, you mentioned Mark Zuckerberg. For some reason, he's very polarizing in the US, and some people really have something against him. And on the other side, no one really talks about the founders of Google. I mean, a lot of people don't even know their names. So it's very interesting to see how it comes down to who's behind the platform and whether or not they take position on matters that Americans feel impacted by.
So, Matt, take a look at some of the criticisms. How much of this is legitimate? How much of it is just politics?
I think what we're seeing right now is absolutely legitimate. It is really these social media platforms, especially Facebook, are experiencing a blowback from basically the internet that they created. And that is one where basically they have been chasing the advertiser dollar to the point where they have created platforms that are really, I don't want to blame them, obviously, for the partisanship in this country, at least in the United States of America. Obviously, that would exist without Facebook or these other social media platforms, but they have certainly helped take it to a much larger degree. They have exponentially increased the problems, and that is because the algorithms that they have created to increase engagement, which then in turn increases the time spent on their websites, which then in turn increase the amount of money they make from advertisers, has really, created this firestorm we see today. So I think all this criticism is absolutely legitimate.
So, Jeff, earlier, in answer to the question of should government solve these problems, I believe your answer was no. So if it's not government that's going to address these problems, who's going to compel the sorts of changes you think are appropriate?
In terms of do we need to break up platforms? It depends. It depends how these platforms got to be together. Like Facebook did acquire Instagram and they acquired WhatsApp. So we can look into it. But what about Google, who created most of the platforms they own today? Do we have to break Google Meet away from Google Search? Or is that not a problem because they created the product themselves?
So I'd like both of you to step back for a minute and think forward. I mean, 10 years ago is like a millennium in technology terms. So no one is going to hold you to it, but think 10 years from now. What is the internet? How different do you expect the internet world to be 10 years from now from where it is today? Matt?
I mean, it really could go either way, like you said. It's forever in in the tech world and on the internet. It would not surprise me if in 10 years we're sitting here having the same conversation about whether the government should act, because we've seen for the 10, 20, 30 years prior that the government hasn't acted when it comes to these upcoming platforms in every decade. There's always been a new platform when it comes to the ever-changing world of technology. Also, it wouldn't surprise me if the push to act created a internet that we actually did not want. In terms of what I brought up with Section 230, there is a push from Republicans in the United States, the conservatives, to basically rescind Section 230, which would have really horrific implications for how people use the internet or how they are able to use the internet. So I really can't speculate because it could go either way. The internet of today can easily look vastly different from the internet of 10 years from now, or maybe even more depressing. It could look similar in terms of rules and regulations.
All right. Jeff, put on your futuristic hat. What do you think will be?
I think we will witness the birth of different internets. I feel like the governments are going to step in and try to regulate the internet, what I call the surface internet. But there's already the dark web, which is another thing we didn't talk about. How do you control that? Will there be decentralized platforms, blockchain, and everything that's like being created in that system that will offer alternative internets to people when the one we know becomes too regulated?
All right. Well, you've just given us stuff to focus on in future shows for the next 10 years. Jeff Derimo, Matt Binder, thank you very much for joining us on Dakhel, Washington. I have the unique claim to being both an early and a late adapter to modern technology, that is. In 1988, I purchased what was then one of the world's first laptop computers to take with me overseas to Oxford and then to Cameroon in West Africa, where I researched and then wrote my doctoral dissertation. It weighed about 25 pounds and had what was called a 386 processor, which was about as slow as watching grass grow. Halfway through my stint abroad, the top 12 lines on the screen blew out, so I wrote a 400-page thesis on just the bottom half of the screen. But I had one of the only laptops in Africa, and without it, I would never have been able to move mountains of files and keep track of thousands of documents. And frankly, I felt pretty cool. At the other end of the spectrum came email. The internet went live in 1991, and by 94, 95, it was becoming more common to be online and to exchange communication by internet. When that first happened, my instinct was to consider it a passing fad, like bell-bottom pants and tie-dyed t-shirts. Should our receptionist continue to take messages by hand, or should she forward them by email? I was asked. I still remember telling her to keep doing it like we've always been doing it. Well, that didn't last long. I tell these two stories about me because each says something about our relationship with technology. Surely one of the most dramatic and dramatically new influences on our life in the past 100 years. Like most things in life, it has both enormous positives and painful and costly negatives. It can make so many things easier, quicker, and more fun. But speed, ease, and enjoyment don't count for everything. Security, privacy, and discretion are important too. And given how many notices of data breaches I have received in recent years, from banks, retailers, hotel chains, and even the US government, it is clear the internet can be a black hole when it comes to those issues too. Can the internet be a mindless waste of time? Sure, but we all have our escapes. The key is to keep it fun, make it harmless, and preferably to interact with others along the way. Can the internet make us more productive? Sure, but the real engine of productivity is our minds, not the tools we have to make best use of them. And can the internet be a source of great anxiety and trauma? Sure. That's why we need to be careful what we post. Need to take an interest in how our kids engage online. And we need to take the idea of security seriously. There is a useful and important national debate on regulation, control, and oversight of the internet, including of major companies like Facebook and Google. In my own little world, the motto to live by is from Aristotle: everything in moderation. Sometimes, of course, it's okay to choose Oscar Wilde's variation: everything in moderation, including moderation. Just make sure it's a choice, not a habit. بهذا نصل لنهاية هذه الحلقة من برنامج داخل واشنطن. إذا كانت لديكم أي استفسارات أو تعليقات حول هذه الحلقة، وخاصة حول الجدل السياسي حيال السيطرة على الإنترنت، أرجو أن تتواصلوا معي عبر تويتر على هاشتاغ Inside Washington أو أن تراسلوني مباشرة على @RobSatloff. سأراكم الأسبوع المقبل، وإلى أن ألقاكم، شكرا لكم وإلى اللقاء.